네, 여러분 요즘 주식 계좌 열어보기가 겁나시죠? 하루는 폭락하고 또 하루는 반등하고 도대체 이 시장이 어디로 가는 건지 불안하기만 합니다. 다들 지금은 현금을 챙길 때다, 몸을 사려야 한다라고 말하면서 시장을 호련히 떠나고 있습니다. 자, 그런데 남들이 공포에 떨 때 오히려 지금이 기회다. 우리는 확고하게 낙관한다라고 주장하는 사람들이 있습니다. 바로 테슬라와 엔비디아를 남들이 보지 않던 그 초기에 발굴해서 전설적인 수익을 낸 곳, 베일리 기포드입니다. 100년이 넘는 시간 동안 이 위기 때마다 어떻게 기회를 찾아낼 수 있었을까요? 오늘은 아주 특별한 두 분을 모셨습니다. 100년 넘게 진짜 성장을 찾아온 영국의 글로벌 운용사 베일리 기포드의 스튜어트 덤바 파트너, 그리고 냉철한 시각으로 신영자산운용에서 베일리 기포드 글로벌 그로스 재간접 펀드의 운용을 담당하고 있는 황명찬 팀장님이 함께하고 계십니다. 자, 특히 스튜어트 덤바 파트너는 이 베일리 기포드 회사의 지분을 보유하고 계신 분으로 오늘 인터뷰를 위해서 멀리 스코틀랜드 에든버러에서 오셨습니다. 저희가 깊은 환영의 인사를 먼저 보내드려야 될 것 같네요. Welcome to Korea.
Thank you. Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
Nice to meet you today. Thank you for making the long journey and welcome to Korea. And some people say the only thing unpredictable than the stock market is Scottish weather. How do you think?
That's an interesting question, is which one is least predictable? I think I would rather predict the long-term direction of the stock market than what's going to happen tomorrow in the Scottish weather.
Right. So I hear you may have brought a bit of that today with you.
Yes,
right?
I brought, well today I'm so enjoying being in Seoul today. It's much more fun than being home.
All right. That sounds very interesting. 그리고 우리 팀장님께서 오늘 또 함께 해주고 계신데요. 오늘 다양한 이야기 또 함께 나눠보도록 하겠습니다. So Stuart, let me begin with you. First of all, we need to say long-term investing means looking 5 to 10 years later. But nowadays, the markets are extremely volatile right now. So these days, long-term means not checking your portfolios at least 24 hours, right?
Yeah, hopefully for longer than 24 hours. You're absolutely right. I think right now there's a lot of people are worried about stuff. You know, there are wars going on, inflation is sticky, interest rates might be coming up, they might be going down, people don't really know. And when people find things to worry about, their horizons become even shorter. And I think that's what we're seeing right now, is people are really not looking, certainly not more than a year ahead. And on top of that, we have exciting things going on, like artificial intelligence, but that's also introducing uncertainty into stock markets. So what happens, their horizons become shorter and shorter. And for companies that are exciting, but on a 5-year view, the sort of things that we're more interested in, they're just becoming almost slightly forgotten. And we can see that in the valuations, that what we have to pay for long-term growth is lower than it's been for about 15 years. If you just look, you know, if you look beyond the AI bubble, there are lots of really fast-growing companies that are being neglected at the moment.
Right. So in Bailey Gifford's recent report, you said our portfolio remains significantly undervalued and we remain strongly optimistic. So how can you say you are finding some opportunities in this volatile market?
Yeah, so I think people tend to think of the market as if it's one thing. It's not one thing. It is globally. It's thousands and thousands of companies. It would be very surprising to me if we couldn't find some interesting companies in there which other investors aren't thinking of and aren't particularly aware of. So when I say I'm optimistic for our portfolio, many of the names in our portfolio people have heard of. Some of the names in there people haven't heard of. We're trying to find the household names of tomorrow today. And we can do that. And actually, almost the more that everyone fixates on NVIDIA and Microsoft and AI and TSMC, these are good companies and we do own some of them. But the more that everybody looks at this little bit of the market, the more we can find big opportunities in other places that people are not thinking about.
팀장님, 방금 스튜어트는 사실은 이제 이런 시장의 투자 전략을 조금 더 우리가 시야를 넓혀서 본다면 더 긍정적일 것이다라고 말씀을 해주셨는데요. 국내에서 이제 자산을 배분하는 운용력 입장에서 보시기에 이제 지금의 글로벌 시장 상황, 특히 이제 베일리 기포드 같은 성장주의 이제 전략이 다시 한번 힘을 받을 수 있는 그런 환경이라고 보실까요?
당연히 그런 환경이라고 생각하고 있습니다. 왜냐하면 지금 우리 글로벌리 저출산이나 저성장에 있는 그런 상황에서는 희소성의 프리미엄이라고 말씀을 드리고 싶은데요. 이렇게 빠르게 구조적 혁신을 이루어가면서 성장하는 기업들에 대한 희소성 프리미엄이 붙는 상황이라고 봐주시면 될 것 같습니다. 그래서 사실 저희는 지금은 성장주를 살 타이밍인가? 라는 어떤 질문도 대단히 중요한 질문이라고 생각하지만 이 저성장이 고착화되는 환경에서 확실한 성장을 보여줄 수 있는 기업은 어디인가에 집중하는 것도 더 중요하다고 생각을 합니다. 그래서 남들이 보지 못하는 이런 성장의 기회를 앞서서 발굴해왔던 베일리 기포드의 역량이 지금 이 시기에 무엇보다도 중요하다고 생각합니다.
네. And that naturally brings me to the next question. Bailey Gifford says it's not an active investor, but actual investor. So one word difference, but a completely different philosophy, don't you think?
Yeah, it means something quite different. I think it means something quite different. Maybe picking up on your comment before, we don't really look for companies that are dependent on economic growth to grow. I think that's 180% back to front. The really good companies create the economic growth. So if you think about it that way, what's far more important is to look at the individual opportunities for capital deployment in the real world. People think stock markets, active investors means let's be different than an index or let's trade stocks. For me, that's not what active investment is about. So we call it actual because what we're trying to capture is what are companies actually doing in the real world? What are management doing? Are they investing in R&D? Are they investing in new products? What time horizons are they thinking about? The problem that happens, I think, in stock markets generally is there is this incredible short-termism. If shareholders are short-term, management start to respond to that. They don't make investments that they should on a 5-year plus horizon. They maybe forgo positive value opportunities. We're trying to look beyond all of that. We try to build relationships with the management of companies. We try and find changes that are happening in the world and where are the big opportunities. And then we don't invest in a share. We try to work with companies who we think have the capability to take advantage of that, and we encourage them to invest. We love companies that are spending their free cash flow on reinvesting for the future, provided that that comes with high returns on equity and at some point they're going to have good margins. Those are the companies that make all the difference. So actual investing is about real world activity, and we just rely on the fact that eventually share prices reflect reality. And we're simply not interested in what share prices do from day to day or week to week or even really year to year, as long as the companies themselves are making great progress.
You sure? Because in a world where we can check prices 24/7, it's very hard to not to check the stock prices.
That's hard, right? But like your phone has an off button, so does your Bloomberg.
So do you often turn off your phone?
No. But I don't look at prices all day long. I think there's a really important point in here, which is, we're in a 24/7 news everywhere world. And we all have to think hard about how we don't just end up in a tunnel of data. Mm-hmm. So you can make the effort. I mean, our offices in Edinburgh are like a library, not like a trading floor. And, people are not sitting staring at screens. We're trying to find interesting things to read and give ourselves time to think, and we talk with each other. It's all quite slow. Mm-hmm. But slow is good if you're trying to find great companies on a 5-year horizon. Looking at the stock market isn't going to help.
Oh, it's very hard to find something slow in a fast investing environment.
Yeah.
Right.
So maybe that sums it up. Actual investing is slow investing. Maybe you could put it that way.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, as you've mentioned, Edinburgh is quiet place, calm and steady. So it's almost the opposite of today's financial markets. So this question just popped up in my mind, that is that calmness part of why Bailey Gifford can invest with such patience and conviction?
I think it's part of it. So I think it doesn't matter where you are now, information is available if you want to have it. So there's no rule that says you can't sit in the middle of New York or Seoul and be patient. So you can do that. I think it's a state of mind as much as it is a location. Where I think location is relevant for us is the types of people who choose to come and work in our firm in Edinburgh tend to be those that think about their own careers long term. They tend to think about the world more slowly. And so I think we attract people who want to invest in the way that we believe. And I think that's very advantageous. I think it's less about information availability, which these days it doesn't matter where you physically are.
That's very impressive. 네, 좋습니다. 이렇게 답변을 받아봤는데요. 사실은 이제 팀장님께서는 수많은 글로벌 운용사들을 살펴보고 계시고 그 환경에 이제 직면하고 계시는데요. 사실은 신영자산은 가치 투자 하우스로 잘 알려져 있는데 왜 성장 투자를 지향하는 베일리 기포드와 파트너십을 체결하고 계신지, 그러니까 계속해서 그 성향이 좀 맞아야 잘 갈 수 있는 건데 사실은 좀 다르다고 보여지거든요. 어떤 점에 좀 주목을 하고 베일리 기포드와 계속해서 협업을 이어가고 계신지가 궁금하네요.
많은 분들이 사실 의아해하시는 질문인데요. 저희가 베일리 기포드를 선택한 기준은 이 가치주냐, 성장주냐에 대한 어떤 스타일보다는 투자를 대할 때 특히 시간을 대하는 태도가 저희와 굉장히 유사하다라는 부분을 좀 말씀을 드리고 싶습니다. 가치 투자라고 한다면은 일반적으로 생각을 하시기에 단순히 PER, 주가 수익 비율이라든지 또는 어떤 자산 비율, PBR 같은 게 싼 주식을 사는 것이라 생각을 하시지만 사실 진짜 가치 투자라고 하는 것은 사실 기업의 본질 가치를 지금 가격과 비교해서 싸게 사서 제값이 반영이 될 때까지 기다리는 거를 가치 투자라고 말씀을 드릴 수가 있겠거든요. 그리고 베일리 기포드 또한 당장의 어떤 숫자는 별로 좋지 않은 그런 기업들일 수 있지만 5년, 10년 뒤에 거대해질 어떤 미래의 가치를 현재의 싼 가격에 발굴한다는 점에서 저희와 투자의 철학이 본질적으로 맞닿아 있습니다. 그래서 사실 저평가된 가치주가 제값을 찾는데도 많은 시간이 필요하고요. 작은 성장주가 아주 큰 기업이 되기까지도 시간이 필요하다라고 말씀을 드릴 수 있을 것 같은데 주가가 아닌 기업을 사고 그 기업이 충분히 성장할 수 있도록 충분한 시간을 주는 것, 이것이야말로 저희 두 회사가 성공 투자를 위해서 꼭 필요한 것이 아닌가라는 공감대를 가지고 있고 그 관점에서 저희가 파트너십을 형성을 하고 있습니다.
So what he have described, the idea that both value investing and growth investing actually rely on time as the most powerful force in compounding really highlights the philosophical alignment between his approach and Bailey Gifford. Oh, you guys agree by nodding.
Yeah, for sure, for
Right,
sure. I think it was Einstein that said that compounding is the eighth wonder of the world, wasn't it? So that is the single most important thing.
That is. And that naturally leads us to the next topic, which is active, bottom-up, high conviction investing. Stuart, many investors today prefer passive ETFs. How about you?
So I wouldn't do that. But I think there's room in the world for that. So my starting point here is that not all approaches to active management are the same. I think, and others think, and there is academic evidence to show that approaches that are high conviction, low turnover, and in which shareholders engage with management have a far higher probability of outperforming the market over the long run. So that's what we do. There is a place, I think, for passive investing if people don't have patience. And I'd rather, if you don't have a 5-year investment horizon, it's not a great idea to invest in our fund because we might outperform, but we might not outperform over that horizon. If you're nervous about not performing like the market and you're going to sell after a bad quarter, then more often than not, investors hurt themselves with that type of an approach. So I think, passive funds have a place for people who are, more behaviorally led or just looking to minimize their costs. For us, we're really trying hard to find the very small number of companies that we think can do incredibly well. But you can't invest that way unless you have the right horizon.
Then why do you believe it's very important to take the risk and responsibility of picking individual companies rather than following the index?
So if you buy the index, you will get the good companies and the bad companies. The question is whether you believe you can yourself or you can find a manager who is able to disproportionately find the good ones. I think risk is misunderstood. Risk is not meaningfully outperforming or underperforming an index. Risk is being invested in the companies that are being disrupted and slowly put out of business. I would suggest to you that not investing in change in the long run is the riskiest thing to do. You don't want to be the person owning the fossil fuel company when the whole economy has electrified. So what feels like risk, because it's different than the index, and some of these companies that have years and years of growth ahead of them, they can be volatile when expectations change. But I would suggest to you that not investing in those companies is risky if you have a 5 to 10 year horizon, because otherwise you're going to get left behind in bits of the economy, which will be reflected in the index, but the index is short term. It's not backwards looking, but it doesn't really look very forwards either.
Right. What would you choose if you are an individual investor?
I would look at my assets and I would say, am I saving for my retirement? Maybe I'm saving for a college fund. If I'm saving for something which is 5 years or longer away, I would unquestionably invest in a manager such as us who is looking at individual companies and seeking out that unusual but spectacular growth. I would form a view whether they can successfully do that. So that's for those long-term assets. I would do that. If we're talking about money that I might need this time next year, then I wouldn't do that. There are other asset classes. As an aside, even investing in passive equity funds is not a very good idea if you have a short horizon, because we might be more volatile than the index, but equity indices are volatile as well. So people really need to think hard about, am I matching my investments with the timeframes that I can leave the money alone? The worst thing anyone can do is to invest in an equity fund, whether active or passive, and then have to take the money out, for some other reason at a time, which a loss is not real until you've sold it. And so you don't want, no investor should be forced into if you're going to invest in equities, you don't want to be forced into selling them. You want to be able to sell at an appropriate time.
Right.
So, I think you have to think your way through all of that. Obviously, I greatly believe in active management. I think if you are going to do active management, you have to do it with conviction, but your clients have to share that attitude. And if they don't, then, you need to do something else.
All right. So that was very helpful strategy when you are planning for your investing portfolio. And I can't leave this topic behind us, which is the artificial intelligence.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah. AI has become the storyline of everywhere in the world, and sometimes even before the plot is, written. From Bailey Gifford vantage point, where do you think we actually are in the real artificial intelligence technology and also the development cycle?
Yeah. So the first thing I'd say is that any topic that everyone wants to talk about to the exclusion of everything else probably means there are great opportunities elsewhere because everyone's so narrow. Having said that, we don't agree that this is necessarily a bubble in AI. I think some false comparisons are being made to the dot-com bubble of 25 years ago. At that time, there were companies that had nothing more than an idea, and often not a very good idea, that were trading on infinite multiples because they didn't even have revenues. This is not the same. The companies that everyone's talking about in AI are pretty highly valued, or they have gone up very sharply in value. But remember, that's on the basis that they either are or likely will be generating enormous revenues and profits from AI, whether as a provider of AI engines or whether by employing some of those engines within their businesses. So if you take something like NVIDIA, which is the most obvious example, and everyone's worried about the bubble, NVIDIA has doubled its earnings every year for 3 years. It's not expensive even relative to its own history. We think it can continue to grow from here. However, maybe it's not the best idea anymore. So actually we've been recycling capital somewhat out of NVIDIA and into other ideas which are less well recognized in the market because we think they likely have more upside from here. But I'm not terribly worried about bubble territory for these stocks. Remember though, that in the short run, stock markets are driven by sentiment, not by fact. So it is absolutely possible that we could have a sharp pull down on some of the prices of these companies. But it shouldn't be prolonged because they have real earnings and real revenues that are underpinning these valuations. So, you know, I have no idea what the market will do. I would not want to say to anyone, these companies will not fall in value. Of course they will at some point, but I think they're solid companies, and I think we need to look through that and understand that, I mean, AI is a incredibly exciting opportunity, and I don't think people really know yet exactly where the value is going to accrue. Is it going to be in the providers of the models? Is it going to be in the companies that use it? Is it going to be in the hardware manufacturers? Right now, there's a battle going on to figure out. There's a huge amount of value being created. It's not that obvious where it's going to end up.
So as there's a saying that tells if you're afraid of catching a cold, you can't go outside. As you're seeing the trend of AI, artificial intelligence, we need to definitely look into the AI sectors, but at the same time, we need to separate the winners from the losers.
Yeah, and remember that there are AI sectors, but actually I don't really think it helps to think about it that way. Any good company that is seeking to be competitive and to grow is going to be looking very hard at how to use AI in its operations. It's a bit like 100 years ago saying electricity is a sector. I mean, it still is, but you know, every company started to use electricity. Every company is going to start to use artificial intelligence. We're just very early in the process of figuring out for whom that is going to be most advantageous.
Oh, that's very important point, I guess. 네, 그래서 이렇게 이제 AI 테마 투자와 관련해서 다양한 이야기를 나눠봤는데요. 사실 이제 전반적으로 모든 산업군에서 AI를 사용하기 시작했기 때문에 그 안에서 옥석 가리기가 필요하다라는 말씀을 해주셨습니다. 그러면 이제 왜 특정 국가나 뭐 AI 같은 핫한 테마에 집중하는 펀드보다 전 세계에 분산적으로 좀 투자를 하는 베일리 기포드의 LTGG 전략이 더 낫다고 보시는지 그 포인트가 굉장히 궁금하거든요.
사실,
그리고 아울러서 이제 LTGG가 어떤 또 약자인지도 한번 설명을 해주시면 좋을 것 같아요.
예, 사실 많은 고객분들께서 최근에 ETF를 이용한 AI 집중 투자 이런 것들을 많이 활용을 하고 계시다 보니까 많이 이제 주시는 질문인데요. 제가 드릴 수 있는 질문은 어떤 특정 테마가 유행을 할 때 그 테마에 투자를 하는 것은 또 큰 수익을 줄 수도 있지만 그 테마가 유행해서 끝나버리게 될 경우에는 또 큰 손실로 돌아오는 경우들이 굉장히 많습니다. 과거 우리나라 시장의 경우에는 2차 전지에 대한 투자 붐이 일었을 때 그 투자 붐일 때는 굉장히 주가가 많이 올랐었지만 그 붐이 급격하게 꺼지면서 많은 분들이 손실을 보셨던 경우들이 많거든요. 그래서 사실 테마 안에서 진정한 승자가 누가 될지도 아무도 모른다라는 부분 또한 문제가 됩니다. 그 부분은 스튜어트가 사실 잘 이야기를 해줬던 것 같고요. 그리고 이런 베일리 기포드의 전략의 장점이라고 말할 수 있는 부분은 혁신이 언제, 어떻게, 어떤 방식으로 일어날지를 알 수 없다라는 점을 인정하는 데서 사실 그 강점이 나온다고 저는 생각을 합니다. 지금은 사실 AI가 굉장히 핫한 시장인데 3년 뒤에는 이러한 붐이 바이오에 적용이 될 수도 있고 또는 지금 이야기 나오는 양자 컴퓨터나 우주 산업 이런 부분이 사실 새로운 붐의 영역으로 들어갈 수도 있는 부분이거든요. 아까 LTGG라고 말씀드렸던 거는 이제 롱텀 글로벌 그로스, 결국에 장기 투자를 한다는 장기 성장주 투자를 한다는 의미인데요. 이런 베일리 기포드의 성장 투자 전략이 미국의 기술주 AI 테마에 집중해서 어떻게 투자를 하는 것이 아니라 럭셔리 소비재나 헬스케어 그리고 중국이나 유럽, 남미의 어떤 플랫폼 기업까지 전 세계의 혁신 기업들을 망라해서 투자를 하기 때문에 아까 말씀드렸던 대로 저희가 예측하기 힘든 다음 테마, 다음 어떤 유행이 왔을 때도 그 분야의 1등 기업을 포트폴리오에 보유할 수 있는 가장 확률이 높은 전략이라고 말씀을 드릴 수 있을 것 같습니다. 그래서 투자하시는 입장에서는 다음에 어떤 테마가 유행할까? 이런 부분에 대한 어떤 큰 고민 없이 이 전략 하나로 세상의 어떤 모든 혁신에 투자하는 효과를 누릴 수 있다는 게 사실 베일리 기포드 LTG 전략의 장점이라고 말씀드릴 수 있을 것 같습니다.
그게 이제 장기적으로 봤을 때도 실제 이제 한 특정 섹터에 투자를 하는 것보다는 좀 분산적으로 성장을 주도할 수 있는 전체적인 그 흐름에서 좀 찾아보는 게 굉장히 중요하다라고 보시는 거죠?
맞습니다. 미리 성장이 이루어질 수 있는, 혁신이 이루어질 수 있는 영역에 먼저 가서 투자를 하셔야 큰 초과 수익을 올릴 수 있다는 말씀을 드리고 싶습니다.
뭐 사실 그게 가장 어려운 부분이지 않을까
맞습니다.
싶습니다. 네, 어떤 이제 기업이 혁신의 기술을 내놓고 혁신의 아이콘이 될 수 있는지를 참 미리 알 수 있으면 참 좋을 텐데 말이죠.
네.
And that brings us to a natural next question, which is about actual investing. I was very surprised that Bailey Gifford invested Amazon, Tesla, Nvidia in early stages. Well, I was in the market too, but I couldn't find those innovative companies, and maybe individual investors all having hard time, finding the real value companies. When you evaluate growth potential beyond the financial statements, what matters the most? So what are the signals that tell you that a company is gonna be innovative in the future
Yeah.
and it will grow potentially like more than expected?
So you will not find that in financial statements. And that's because the companies that can be hugely successful have to start small. So we have to imagine what they're capable of, not look in their accounts to see what's already happened. And that's such an important distinction. So if you take some of these examples, when we invested in Amazon, so none of this is certain. If it was certain, it would be easy. We'd all be doing it, except you'd be too late. It would be in the price. So the first thing you have to realize that this is about probabilities and scenarios and imagination. It's not a science. So when we look at something like Amazon, when we bought it in 2004, it was a bookseller with potential. But we could see that this could expand to many more categories beyond what they were doing. And we also knew that it had incredibly ambitious long-term management that was quite happy to reinvest in its own business if it could find great opportunities. Amazon was not a popular investment for at least a decade after that because they didn't make profits. They plowed all their money back into the business. Investors find it hard to deal with that.
Right.
So part of the common factor here is management and alignment and ambition. And then I'll give you a quick other example, which is the Tesla one. How do we arrive at this as a possibility? Well, that's because we have relationships with interesting people. One group of them is the Santa Fe Institute in the US. They do lots of studies on long-term change. And they brought to our attention in around 2007 that battery technology was evolving to the point where it now made things viable that didn't used to be, one of those being electric cars. Now you can make electric cars, it's affordable and it's kind of going to work. So we went and we looked and we came across Tesla and we realized, will this work? We don't know for sure if it will work, but we can see that this is now something that's possible. So let's imagine where this could get to. And then on top of that, although it was early days, people were becoming concerned about environmental issues and, fossil burning. So we could see, not only is this possible, but there may be huge tailwinds to the electrification of vehicles and now trucks and all sorts of other things. So did we know? We don't have a crystal ball, but we knew that there was something becoming possible which could be huge. And we knew that there was a management team that was really going to try to grasp that opportunity so we could see if this works, this is going to be incredibly successful. And that's an example of one that did work. Of course, there are some that didn't, and no one talks about them because they're not household names now.
Right.
But that's the point. We just need to find some of those truly great companies, and that's where our portfolio returns come from.
Oh, that's right. You know what? What I most regret about is like 20 years ago, I was in the United States and I bought some clothes on Amazon, but I never bought Amazon stock. So if I bought Amazon stock that time, it would have been a huge profit.
Do you know,
right?
there's an interesting, very often, great companies touch everybody's lives, so they don't come out of nowhere. So I mean, one of if this is of interest, one of the biggest mistakes we made was kind of similar to that. So we looked at Netflix in 2009 when they were still mailing DVDs to people.
Right, at that time, I used to visit GameStop for video games.
Yeah, that would be right.
And some movies for,
So now we know what's happened. But back then, did we have the imagination to figure that out? So it was actually a mistake. We looked at it in 2009. We didn't buy it until 2011, and it had already gone up in value by 6 times. We've since made 20 times our money, but that was a mistake. We should have bought it 2 years earlier. It was, the ingredients were there. We could see what might happen. sometimes we just lack in imagination and confidence.
Right. Bailey Gifford already found NVIDIA and Amazon, Tesla, some that kind of big tech companies. And I was curious, NVIDIA still looks very strong to many investors, while Bailey Gifford holds a sizable portion of NVIDIA. So do you still think it has a extra, upside on NVIDIA?
Yeah, so we still hold it. We haven't completely sold it. If we didn't think it had upside, or even as much upside as average, then we would have completely sold it. So we still think it's a great company. We think it can double again in maybe the next...
Double again?
Well, certainly in terms of its revenues and profitability. So yeah, and the share price may well follow that. So we're still optimistic on the case for holding NVIDIA, but but we have reduced it a little bit. It's becoming better known.
Was it because of Google's Gemini?
Well, that's been all over the news this past week.
Right. Gemini and TPU.
Yeah, right. So there's a whole technical discussion about whether TPUs
Can it replace?
So Gemini, so the TPU doesn't actually have broad processing. It works well within Google's cloud. It's not really got broader application than that, or there's no evidence yet that it does. So there's a whole discussion about whether GPUs are better than application specifics. I don't think that's clear yet, but what we do know is that NVIDIA's chips are still a generation ahead for general AI use. And there's been a big reaction to this idea that maybe they're not the only show in town. But don't forget, Meta are still spending tens of billions of dollars on NVIDIA chips. If you were Meta or some of these other companies, Microsoft, for example, you don't want to only have one supplier. It's very understandable, I think, that they're spending some of their capex somewhere else to try and figure out how to not be completely reliant on NVIDIA. That makes sense. It hasn't changed the game all that much at the moment. NVIDIA are still, their orders are far greater than their ability to produce chips. They're still offering the best GPUs, and there's still no strong evidence that general purpose GPUs aren't better suited to this than the sort of application specific chips that Google are making, which is like a really long and boring answer, but the answer is there's so much uncertainty around AI here. I think people, they see one news event and they jump to a conclusion. and that's just not how we think.
But have you used Google's Gemini 3 version?
No,
3?
no,
It was
personally
amazing.
I haven't. No, although it probably drives the AI when you do a Google search. I presume it's Gemini that produces the AI answer, and it works. But it maybe only works in that ecosystem. There's so much to go. We're right at the beginning of this whole AI thing, how it's used, how the competitive dynamics pan out, where the pricing power lies. What if AI turns out to be a commodity?
Commodity?
Then, all of this gigantic spending on capex is not going to make a huge amount of money. But that's probably not going to be the case. It's more likely that individual models will be suited for individual purposes. The market will shake itself out, and you can't get away from the fact that these are game-changing technologies that have huge value associated with them. But we have to think quite widely. We have to hold our views lightly, actually, because it's such a fast-changing area. If you're certain, you've probably missed something. Spread out the bets a little bit.
Right. We've seen a lot of changes in AI market.
Yeah.
Already.
Yeah, it's incredible how quickly.
Within like 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
네, 좋습니다. 그래서 그 베일리 기포드에서 어떻게 초기에 이렇게 대형 빅테크 기업들을 미리 발견하고 또 이 투자를 할 수 있었는지에 대한 이야기를 다양하게 나눠봤는데요. 운용형님, 사실 이제 재무제표상 이런 기업들을 그냥 재무제표로 보고 발견하기는 쉽진 않습니다. 뭐 다양한 측면을 좀 살펴봐야 하는 것도 있겠고요. 적자인 기업에 투자하는 것도 리스크가 크기 때문에 좀 지양을 하는 편이기도 하잖아요.
네.
근데 이제 재간접 펀드를 운용하는 입장에서 미래를 위해 적자를 내는 기업에 투자를 하는 것, 그게 이제 과연 어떻게 좀 다가올지 궁금하기도 하고요. 사실 이런 기업들을 평가하실 때 어떤 것을 가장 우선적으로 좀 보시는지도 궁금하거든요.
우선 재무제표의 적자라는 것을 좀 이해하기 쉽도록 2가지 정도로 정의를 한다면 뭐 좋은 적자가 있고 나쁜 적자가 있습니다.
좋은 적자도 있나요?
네. 일단 이해하기 쉽도록 제가 두 가지로 구분을 한 건데 나쁜 적자라고 하는 거는 결국에 일반적으로 생각하시는 경쟁력을 잃거나 상품이 인기가 없어지거나 하는 경우에서 어쩔 수 없이 결국에 손실이 나는 경우를 나쁜 적자라고 이야기를 할 수 있을 것 같고요. 반면에 이제 좋은 적자도 있냐라고 여쭤보셨는데 미래의 어떤 시장을 의도적으로 장악하기 위해서 이러한 어떤 이익을 의도적으로 유보하고 투자를 집행하는 경우에 이런 손실이 발생을 할 수가 있습니다. 쿠팡이랑 아까 아마존 이야기도 계속 나왔었는데요. 이런 쿠팡이랑 아마존의 초기에 미래의 시장을 선점하고 장악하기 위해서 의도적으로 이익을 유보하는 공격적인 투자를 집행하는 경우들이 많이 나왔었고요. 적자만을 두고 살펴볼 것이 아니라 사실 저희가 베일리 기포드와 함께 투자 포트폴리오를 점검할 때 가장 유의 깊게 보는 부분은 단위 경제라는 부분과
단위 경제.
네네네. 단위 경제라는 부분과 경쟁의자를 볼 수가 있을 것 같습니다. 단위 경제에 대해서 말씀을 드리면 당장은 적자라도 고객 한 명을 추가로 유치를 했을 때 장기적으로 벌어들일 수 있는 이익이 비용보다 크다면 그거는 이제 단위 경제상으로 저희는 건전한 투자라고 판단을 하고 있고요. 단순히 어떤 내러티브, 꿈 이런 것을 가지고 이것을 홍보하는 기업이 아니라 압도적인 기술력이나 플랫폼 파워를 가지고 경쟁자들이 넘볼 수 없는 진입 장벽을 쌓고 있는지를 저희는 지속적으로 검증을 하고 있습니다. 그래서 신영자산운용과 저희 베일리 기포드가 이런 좋은 적자 기업을 선별해내는 프로세스가 제대로 작동하고 있는지를 항상 저희는 토론하면서 검증을 하고 있고요. 그리고 포트폴리오 내의 어떤 투자 기업에 대해서 초기에 제시했던 투자 아이디어가 훼손되지는 않았는지, 그리고 투자 기업이 적자 속에서 시장 점유율이나 어떤 기술적 우위가 계속해서 유지가 되고 있고 실제로 강화가 되고 있는지를 지속적으로 모니터링하면서 관리하고 있습니다.
말씀해 주신 대로 사실은 그걸 선별하는 것이 가장 어려운 또 부분 중에 하나이지 않을까 싶습니다. And markets actually are never a straight line, and volatility is part of the game. So every long-term strategy has seasons, right? So which season are we in?
Oh, that's a good question. I think other than in the very well-known stocks that everybody's talking about, I think growth valuations are not extended. So I think, I don't know what season that is that spring? Because you will always see volatility in markets. Good companies that drop in value, that's very often an opportunity to buy more of them, but only if you're doing your homework. So you don't chase a share price down, but if the company itself is making progress and the share price is going down, then by definition, the company's getting cheaper. Sometimes a share price can be going up and the company's getting cheaper because the progress of the company is faster than the progress of the share price. So there's no substitute for that sort of looking underneath to see what's going on. And I think, you know, as we do diversify our bets away from some of the bigger AI names, I think there's a whole lot of value being created which is not really being considered by the market or recognized by the market. And that's in areas from everything to, you know, it's drug discovery, it's some elements of financial services where, for example, AI is being used to dramatically reduce fraud. It's autonomous transport, and that's not just cars, that's trucks, and even we invest in a company which is making
Urban air
eVTOLs, you know, yeah, so, you know,
eVTOLs.
basically replacements for helicopters. That's not science fiction, that's coming. It's coming next year. So I think there are lots of things that people are not thinking about. And then one final point I'd make, all of our discussion around tech, not every growth company is a tech company. We invest in some luxury goods companies, which are the opposite of tech. They are all about craftsmanship and brand management and demand management and creating a situation where people see these goods as status symbols. That's got nothing to do with tech. That's just cleverly running a company and managing a brand. There is growth out there that is not AI related. That's the point I'm making. And I think that as everybody fixates on AI, some of those companies are just being completely overlooked now.
And you said we're in the spring?
I think we're in the spring, yeah.
We are. And are we going to head into brilliant summer?
Well, I'd like to
soon?
think so. I'd like to think so. But, you know, as ever, like, I guess the stock market doesn't follow in the same sequence that the seasons do. So who knows?
우리 팀장님께서는 어떻게 평가를 해주시겠어요? 사실 지난 2년간 이제 시장의 흐름이 조금은 다른 양상을 보였습니다. 지금 계절적으로 평가를 한다면 어떤 계절이 있다고 보시나요?
저 역시 스튜어트 파트너의 의견에 전적으로 동의하고요.
봄인가요?
아까 말씀
네, 산뜻한.
드렸던 대로 지금 시장이 과거 한 2년 정도 AI 붐이 굉장히 크게 불면서 뜨거운 어떤 성장주의 시장이 계속해서 이루어진 것은 사실인데 좀 특기할 만한 부분이 있다면 사실 극심한 양극화 성장이라는 점을 말씀을 드릴 수 있을 것 같아요. AI 혁신을 주도하는 뭐 엔비디아나 M7 이런 검증된 빅테크들 이런 거대 LLM 모델을 만들고 거대한 캐펙스 투자를 하는 이런 큰 빅테크들의 사실 시장이 집중하는 시장이고 이것이 이제 거대한 주식시장 내의 양극화를 만들어냈다고 한다면 앞으로의 시장 흐름이 조금은 바뀔 수 있다고 보는 점은 지금까지가 AI 기술 그 자체에 좀 열광을 하는 시장이었다고 한다면 지금은 AI가 실제 우리 삶 또는 산업에 이렇게 적용이 되면서 생산성이 혁명적으로 커지는 이런 생산적 혁명에 집중하는 시기가 다가오고 있다라고 저는 판단하고 있습니다. 그래서 투자 시장에서 빅테크의 그늘에 가려져 있던 다양한 영역의 어떤 성장 기업들 재평가를 받게 될 것이라고 저는 생각을 하고 있고요. 남들이 이렇게 빅테크만 바라볼 때 시장에 관심 밖에 이런 진짜 성장을 미리 선점하는 것이 더 중요해지지 않을까라고 생각을 하고 있습니다.
네.
그래서 결국에 소외된 기업이 재찾기를 찾기까지 아까 말씀드렸던 대로 인내심이라는 부분이 굉장히 좀 중요할 것 같고요. 이러한 변동성을 좀 이기고 아까 스튜어트 파트너도 잘 이야기를 해줬지만 변동성을 이기고 장기 투자를 하기 위해서는 자금의 성격을 좀 철저하게 분리를 하셔서 뭐 5년 또는 10년을 보고 묻어둘 수 있는 뭐 예를 들어 퇴직연금 같은 긴 호흡의 자금으로 이런 성장주에 집중 투자하시는 것이 단기적인 하락에 흔들리지 않고 기업의 어떤 구조적인 성장, AI에 따른 혁신적인 어떤 성장의 과실을 충분히 다 누리실 수 있는 방법이 되지 않을까 생각합니다.
사실 이제 장기 투자를 하기 위해서는 인내심이 무엇보다 가장 중요한 요소가 되지 않을까 싶습니다. So what he said was investing is like planting a tree. So at first, you have to give your full patience to the plant, and the fruit never appears the day you plant it. You have to wait. And patience is what turns seeds into forests. Stuart, and from a global perspective, how do you see Korean market then?
Okay,
Well, that's a very curious part. And we have world-leading semiconductors like Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix.
Yeah, okay, so let's start with Samsung and SK Hynix. So neither of them are in our global best ideas portfolio, but we do own them for some other more concentrated regional portfolios. So we like those companies. We think they, as a pair, they work well because they tend to win at each other's expense. So, but that's okay. So first it was Samsung, then it was SK. Now maybe we're moving back to Samsung a little bit. So we like those companies. There are some great companies here in Korea. The challenge, as you know, has always been sort of governance discount, concerns over shareholder interests. That's being addressed. I think it's early to know whether, what impact that's going to have. I know clearly the market's been very strong this year here. I think that has more to do with this performance of Samsung and SK than anything broader than that. But we've become quite optimistic on the ability of Korean companies to focus more on shareholder outcomes, and maybe that will lead to better capital deployment. And there are great companies here that have not been as globally dominant as they might have been. I guess
Like, for example?
Well, I don't know, some of the auto manufacturers, for example, who I think are making really good products at sensible prices and ought to have more appeal overseas. And they have had some success. But why has that not been greater? I don't know. But I think as the world starts to understand that governance is better here in Korea, then those companies become of wider appeal to a greater audience. And then there's also, this is more cultural than investment. But
Cultural?
Cultural, just simply as Korea becomes more recognized on the world stage, so more attention comes here, and that is happening. So, there's cultural exports happening from Korea now, and I think that's fantastic, so Squid Games and K-pop.
Right.
Awareness grows on the global stage. I think the outlook's pretty positive. There are not yet many examples of truly world-leading companies here, but I think that could improve.
Oh, all right. So that's very interesting. But on the other hand, those Korean companies are not really valued at their real prices. I think.
So that's the
in my
government.
opinion.
That's the attention and governance bit. So a bit more attention from global investors, meaning US and Europe, I think have a very Western lens through which they view Asian and Latin American markets. There are fantastic opportunities here. I'm generalizing widely. I'm not one of those who thinks Asia is one place, but generalizing widely, you have governments that are quite business friendly. You have companies that are improving in their governance. Intra-Asian trade is now a far greater proportion. Export, it's not really about exporting to the West anymore, it's about intra-Asian trade, or at least in large part. There are all sorts of tailwinds happening here. Frankly, a lot of the political activity is certainly no worse and arguably better than some places in the West.
You sure? Tailwinds, not headwinds?
Well, not any worse than anywhere else. So you put all that together, and yet I think the prevailing Western view is still really not really understanding the amount of progress that's been made. I mean, I get so excited. I come here to Asia quite often, and I love what I see, and the energy is fantastic, and the growth is fantastic. And not enough people come spend time here to understand that. You know, there are investors who think there's nothing beyond the West Coast of America and the East Coast of China. And that's kind of, I understand why, because they produce great companies. But there's so much more. And I think Korea surely must play a role in that.
You sure?
Well, eventually.
Eventually.
Yeah.
I hope so. And now for our final question, perhaps the one our audience might have been waiting for the most. Many Korean individual investors are trying to find their own future for their senior ages. After their retirement, they're planning for long-term wealth building. Like pension is not very supportive in here, Korea. So all while surviving the roller coaster of global market. So what would be the best plan for them to set up for their future?
So this goes back to the conversation about timeframes. So if you're saving for your pension and you're 30 years old or even 40 years old, and remember, you don't die when you start working. So if you're 40, you've probably still got 45 years of life left. That is a very long time. So you have the luxury of looking through the volatility of equity markets, but you have to not hurt yourself. Value doesn't come from trading in markets. Value comes from participating in real world wealth creation. So my advice is start investing in the stock market early, put in what you can afford to put in, keep going, don't fixate on news, be patient. Every single piece of history you can look at tells you that if you do that for long periods, you will get a strong return on your assets. And that's actually what makes a dignified retirement affordable, is you've got to start early, you've got to stay in the market.
I think decision to get rid of the application would be the best way to plan for your future, because as I said, it's very hard to not open up the application within 24 hours.
There is evidence in the US that the best performing 401ks are the ones that people paid into and forgot they had.
Forgot they had.
Genuinely,
Wow.
that's what led to the best outcomes.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, don't try and time the market either by selling when you're in it or by waiting to buy. You don't know. I don't know. Nobody knows if the market is going to be higher or lower next week or next month. If you wait for an opportunity, you might never do anything. So just start investing. You don't have to put all your money in at once. Just start and then keep going and then just employ patience. And you cannot, no one can consistently time the market. If you try to do that, you're highly likely going to achieve a worse outcome than a better outcome. So invest, stay patient. Don't look. If you can stop yourself from looking, don't look.
Like Scottish weather, unless
Yeah.
you get a sunny weather, you have to be patient.
That's exactly right.
Right.
That's exactly right.
네, 좋습니다. 우리 황 팀장님께도 마지막으로 투자자분들께 전하고 싶은 메시지가 있으시다면 어떤 내용일까요?
스튜어트 파트너와 마찬가지로 타이밍, 마켓 타이밍을 노리시는 것보다는 시장에 꾸준히 남아 계시면서 장기 투자하는 부분이 무엇보다 중요하다라고 생각을 하고 있고요. 자본시장이 계속해서 성장하는 그 성장의 가능성 이런 부분들을 믿으면서 시장에서 계속 지속적으로 투자를 유지하시는 것이 중요하다라고 말씀드릴 수 있을 것 같습니다.
네, 좋습니다. 오늘 굉장히 흥미로운 이야기를 많이 들었습니다. 스튜어트 우리 파트너님 그리고 황 팀장님께서 귀한 시간을 내주셔서 깊이 있는 인사이트를 나눠주셨는데요. I really want to express my sincere gratitude to be here with us today and share some insightful ideas together.
Oh, thank you. It's been a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. 네, 두 분처럼 정말 이렇게 긴 호흡의 투자를 실제로 실천해 온 전문가들의 이야기를 가까이에서 들을 수 있는 자리는 흔치 않죠. 오늘 의미 있는 이야기를 나눈 만큼 여러분들도 다양한 아이디어를 반영해서 투자 전략을 세워보시길 바라겠습니다. 저희는 여기서 인사드리겠습니다. 함께해 주신 여러분 고맙습니다.